All right. So I have so many of you on here. So if you could each go through and, introduce yourselves real quick before we start, that would be great.
Okay. I'm Andrae Gonzales.
I'm Rachel Magnus.
I'm Carla Barrientos.
Fantastic. All right. Thank you all.
Oh, and Brian Boozer.
We have one more. Do we?
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead. Brian,
It's okay.
go ahead.
Yeah, my name is Brian Boozer. I'm the engineer, producer side of things.
Awesome. Glad to have you all here. So first off, I'm going to ask, how did Hello Bakersfield get started? And anybody can take a crack at that.
Well, it was a brainchild of mine about 2 years ago, and I pitched it to Rachel Magnus, who's a curator at the Bakersfield Museum of Art, to do a podcast with me that would explore the different parts of Bakersfield that were, lesser known, and to understand the perspectives of lots of people. As we know that Bakersfield continues to grow and become more diverse, we wanted to include more and more people into a broader community conversation. And so that idea kind of grew into this Hello Bakersfield podcast, and we knew we wanted to have a team of hosts. And so we invited Carla Barrientos, and then Jesus Gonzales, and then Justin Salters to be part of the team of hosts to interview people once a week.
Awesome. And, forming the podcast and getting it to, all set up together, what certain things did you all want to focus on, when it came to choosing guests?
I think a priority of the podcast has always been to get to know the people behind their positions or behind their what they do for this community. And that's what really excited me about the idea of Hello Bakersfield. I think often across the board, we reduce a person to what they do, and to truly get to know somebody, what motivates them, what makes them passionate, is something that's a conversation that will inspire a lot more people. And that's what we really try to do on the podcast, is to get to know the people behind the projects.
And have you all been surprised at all of, what some of the guests say, as you're learning more about the people that come on and what they do in our community? Has anything kind of stood out with hearing these stories that people have shared?
I think we've had so many different types of guests. I think our guests run the gamut. And I think what's been so surprising is how candid people are. They're coming from all walks of life, all industries, from artists to, business people. And they tell us all about themselves, from whether it be humble beginnings or, when they had some tough, difficult times in their life, to just fun, what their hobbies are and their interests. So I think what's been really surprising is how open people have been and candid, and just really into giving Bakersfield a glimpse of what is out there, that not just the surface, not just this is what they do, but really the person. That has been very refreshing too.
Awesome. And have you all gotten any feedback from your listeners? How have they reacted to these podcasts?
It's fun to hear from listeners all the time in various settings. So I'll be, walking down the street, and someone will be saying, will shout, "Hello Bakersfield," or I'll be in a meeting and someone will tap me on the shoulder saying, "I listened to your podcast and I really appreciate this perspective and this voice." And I think what we try to do is be very real about our community, right? Talk about the things we love, and talk about those things that we struggle with. And I think that resonates with a lot of our listeners. Many people don't know some of the hidden gems of our community. And when we talk about them, or when our guests bring those to light, it's helpful for our listeners to learn more about the community they live in. But also, I think when we talk about some of our challenges, people feel like they're not alone, right? That there's someone else who senses the same things that they do. and we try to provide those opportunities for our listeners to take the next step and to be part of not only the conversation but also part of the community change that's happening in our broader community. And so the feedback has been overwhelmingly positive from listeners who feel like this is sort of a community. In fact, we have one individual who wrote us and said that they were actually listening to our podcast while living in LA. And because of, the conversations and hearing us talk about Bakersfield, this community, and our guests, decided to move to Bakersfield. And so that was really inspiring to hear as well.
Awesome. Now, from a tech standpoint, clearly, because of everything that's going on in the world right now, everybody's socially distanced and everything. So has that aspect of our daily life now, kind of come into play when having to set all of this stuff up?
Yeah, I think obviously when we started this, we were meeting in the studio environment, and everything was very sound, technically speaking. We had a very nice sounding podcast, and all of a sudden when the pandemic hit, we had to distance and go the Zoom route. And so I think, it definitely has its own unique challenges now. It's a little more awkward to have a discussion with a handful of people over Zoom, and it does present a few challenges, but I think we're making the best of it, and it's actually it's still turning out really well. The conversations are still just as engaging, I think, and it just sounds a little different. But as soon as it's safe to return back to the studio and we can sort of flatten the curve, I think we'll do that as soon as we can.
Awesome. Now, obviously, podcasts are booming right now. Off the top of my head, you think of like the Joe Rogan podcast, and there's just so many others. Do you see a really broad future to, continuing this and then, even expanding it? Are there any guests that you would like to have on that you haven't gotten yet? Anybody?
Well, we're seeing that our audience is continuing to grow, so that's a positive thing. We just recorded this morning our 50th episode, and that was a milestone for us. I mean, we really didn't know what to expect in the very beginning. We were just doing it as an act of love and testing the waters, and so we didn't know if a dozen people were going to listen or 100 people or 1,000 people, but our numbers are growing and we feel good about it, and it's worth it to us to continue the podcast. And we really think of it as a conversation. And
continue.
In terms of the future, I think we're all looking forward to continuing the dialogue. And one of the things we did last season was host a live show where we were able to be with our listeners, and we had a packed house, and we're looking to do that again once we get past this pandemic, have a conversation with all of our listeners in the same room and maybe have some sort of an event with our listeners. I think that was really touching to see the folks who are listening to our podcast in person. So hoping to do some of that.
And how do you all find the people, your guests that you have on?
I think part of our success lies in the diversity of our hosts, and the way that guests are scheduled is we round robin each week. A different host takes on the responsibility of scheduling a guest. So if I'm scheduling, typically there's going to be a creative person that comes on, and everybody is gathering people that they have connections with. But what it's allowed for is an incredibly diverse array of guests that come from all different backgrounds and work in all different fields. And really the podcast, it is a conversation about the community as a whole. And it's because of the diversity of the scheduling and our hosts.
Awesome. Well, I love to see the passion coming out of all of y'all when you're talking about this. And definitely congratulations on 50 episodes. can't wait to see more. I will open the platform to anybody who would like to say anything before we end. Anybody who has anything you want to say to all the viewers watching this, go ahead.
I'll just jump in and say, look, again, this is really a labor of love for all of us on the show. Brian volunteers his time to do this. All of us, we volunteer our time to recruit guests, to research our guests, to interview them, to meet offline and talk about the podcast. This is a volunteer effort. We're not trying to monetize this podcast or this product. It really is a labor of love, and we're doing it for the community. And we don't want to sugarcoat things. We want to have an honest conversation about those experiences in this community. And more recently, we had a show that was dedicated to the Black Lives Matter movement and the local protests, and we wanted to discuss what our perspectives were and what the larger narrative was about. And so I think that spirit of conversation is really needed in this community, and we're trying to provide that through this podcast.